Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second and last day of the Virtual Region Forum of CLIMAAX. For those that they weren't with us during the day one, I will be your moderator for today. I'm Athanasia Maria Tompolidi, Policy and Project Officer in Eurada, and with the help of the CLIMAAX colleagues, we will guide you through this second day. We created this forum to recreate the kind of the rich exchange and co-learning that many of you experienced during our workshop in Barcelona in June 2025. And that gathering showed us how valuable it is when regions come together. Today's session continues our shared journey of learning from regional experiences in climate risk assessment and adaptation. The core of today's programs will be experiences. We will show experiences from across Europe. So let's move to some housekeeping rules before we go to the interesting parts of today's virtual forum. This session is being recorded, which means that in case you do not want to appear in the recording, please turn off your camera. Whenever you feel like you have a question, we would like to encourage you to use the raise hand feature during the Q&A moments, or alternatively, submit your questions in the Q&A box, which looks like the icon that the yellow arrow is pointing, and it is in the edges of your screen, of the lower part. Next slide, please. So let's move to our today's agenda. We have begun with a brief welcome, and we will follow up with the Inspired by Regions segment, where representatives from Southwest Finland will, together with representatives from Ireland, will present their ongoing work and insights. As we have already given you a hint, the core of today's program will then highlight PICO experiences. We will discuss later what is this PICO session from across Europe and beyond, showcasing practical approaches to key climate risks from wildfires, heat waves, floods, etc., served by regions and local actors working on the ground. These exchanges will give us the opportunity to explore diverse perspectives, discuss the challenges and solutions, and strengthen collaboration among regions that facing similar climate impacts. Then we will conclude the session with a short wrap-up reflecting on the key takeaways from today's discussions. And now I would like to give the floor to our Christopher Polster, research engineer in ECMWF. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Athanasia. Hello, everyone. I will not say very much because I'd like to put the focus on the two regions presenting today in our Inspired by the Regions section, as we had it on Tuesday. So let me introduce our first speaker right away. I think we have him on the next slide. From the CLIMAAX project, which is being carried out by the Regional Council of Southwest Finland, we have Otto Lapalainen today with us. Otto is a specialist at Wallonia, which is the expert organization for sustainable development of the municipalities of Southwest Finland. And he will be sharing their experience with the climate risk assessment with us today. So Otto, I believe you should be able to share your screen any second now.
Okay, I will have to share my own screen. Okay, then. Just a second.
No worries, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Otto Lappanen from the Regional Council of Southwest Finland, and I'm going to be talking about our results and experiences from our sub-project. We're a second call regions, so we still have 9 months to go in the project. Southwest Finland is located at the coast of the Baltic Sea, at the southwest corner of our country, as the name also describes. Our region is economically diverse, but regarding our climate risk analysis, I want to bring up two characteristics that maybe characterize us from other regions in Finland, and maybe also explain why we choose to focus on the workflows that we have chosen. We are the most important food producing region in Finland, but the climate change will make the growing conditions more unstable and also increase damages from both droughts and heavy rainfall events. But on the other hand, we also have benefits. We have a cold climate, which means that the warmer climate will increase the length of the thermal growing season, increasing yields and also allowing the cultivation of new crops, such as corn, for example. And secondly, we are home to the Archipelago Sea, which unfortunately is one of the most polluted sea areas in the world and also highly vulnerable to climate change. And the combination of droughts and subsequent heavy rainfall and flooding plus nutrients and harmful substances into the sea, which worsens the issues. And I also have to say that our climate risks are maybe not as severe as in the Mediterranean, for example, but it still means that we have to prepare for things that were not even an issue some decades ago. So let's start with the results of our agricultural drought workflow. We're considered the region with the highest drought risks in Finland, and we have the agriculture is an important sector in our region, both as an income for rural areas, but also in terms of national food security. The region has very high share of agricultural land, but there is very little artificial irrigation capacity in our region. This is mainly because traditionally the fields have relied on natural irrigation from rains. There is also little potential to increase it. They say that Finland is a land of thousands of lakes, but Southwest Finland is maybe an exception in that matter. We mostly have just small rivers that are not maybe even capable for increasing artificial irrigation. We have studied the effects of drought on wheat, sugar beet, and barley, and the results forecast mostly moderate impacts on the studied crops. On average, there are yield losses of around 2 to 10% for each crop in the region, but there is still spatial and annual variation involved. And for us, it's been interesting that the models show largest losses in the near future, and the losses should decrease towards the end of the century in every scenario and model. And we have come to the conclusion that it's maybe due to better growing conditions overall. On this slide, we have a graph on yield losses of wheat, which shows the variation of the different models and map points. We are pondering currently whether we should use the maps or some sort of graphs like this in our communication. That's a work in progress still. It's an interactive plot, and my colleague Omar will send you a link to the chat so you can check it out by yourselves. And going forward to the results of the heavy rainfall workflow, preparedness for flood risks in Finland is rather good overall, but stormwater systems in the cities can be seen as a weak point. We have localized this data by including local rain warning levels and also a new climate model which should be more suitable for northern climate conditions. And we've studied 24-hour periods of rain, and we used the national heavy rain warning levels as thresholds. And overall, we can say that both the frequency and the intensity of the rainfall events will increase in the future. On the right, we have the map on shift of magnitude for 120 millimeter rains, and overall, talking about all of these different levels, 50, 70, and 120, the intensity will increase by 20 to 50% depending on the scenario and the rain level and the models used. Here we see the rainfall return period graph. My colleague will also link this to the chat. And the frequency can also be seen to increase, so that these kinds of events can happen twice as often for 50 millimeter rains, and for heavier rains it can be 2.5 to 10 times more often, depending on the scenario. And then we were asked to talk about the usability of the results, and here are some overall thoughts that we have come to. And first of all, the project funding has allowed us to conduct our first climate risk assessment, which is a great thing for us. It has also allowed us to focus on adaptation as a strategic theme, and to include it in the regional climate roadmap, which has not had a strong adaptation focus previously. And the project has also been a great way to spark a discussion on the climate risks and adaptation measures with our stakeholders. And it has been an opportunity to really push forward the theme. We have also found that the results that we get from the workflows are easy to communicate, which is of course a huge plus. And but in the end, it all depends on if our stakeholders themselves find our results useful. There are already heaps of well-researched data, and it's also a question whether the stakeholders can find the added value. Then we have some workflow-related thoughts here. Overall, the results from both of our main workflows have been well received by our stakeholders, and also the resources that we have been able to consult. And there are no big problems there regarding credibility, for example. Crop-specific results have not been studied here before, so they are an interesting addition for our stakeholders. And the results on the heavy rainfall workflow are in line with national results, and but we think that regional results are, of course, easier for us to communicate to our local stakeholders. Then we have some reservations as well. Firstly, estimating monetary values of the crops in the future seems quite difficult the further into the future we go. So we might just use the yield reduction percentages in our communication. Also, some of the most important crops are missing from the database, such as oats, for example. And finally, I still have, yeah. Also, the forecasting the incidence of heavy rainfall events as locally as the maps present might not be possible, according to some of the researchers that we've been talking to. So we're pondering whether we should present them in some other form to our stakeholders. It's still also a work in process. And finally, the river flood damage workflow produced some unrealistically high results for us, but we never got to the end of it. So what's the actual problem? So maybe it just isn't a fit for our rivers. We have also learned quite many lessons during the project. Here are the most important ones. We think we have benefited from doing the analysis in-house with the help of our local stakeholders and some researchers that we've been able to reach out to instead of outsourcing it. It has required expertise and human resources, but on the other hand, it has created also deep understanding and ownership and allowed for knowledge exchange both within our organization and our stakeholders as well. With basic GIS and coding knowledge, it has been surprisingly easy to learn the use of tools with the help of CLIMAAX resources. And regarding the results, they have seemed were quite trustworthy overall, but feel that they cannot be trusted blindly. Critical thinking and ability to compare results with existing data and assessments it has been very important. And we have also found that reaching out to national researchers has been very important. And we have been lucky to have had them involved pro bono. This way, we've also been able to ensure the correctness of our climate risk analysis and also the interpretations of our results. Then we have some lessons learned regarding our stakeholders. The themes of our project are new for many of our stakeholders, which means that communicating these difficult themes in an understandable fashion is crucial, especially if we're talking to citizens directly. And we find that giving the data a context and meaning is far more important than just showing numbers and graphs to them. We also think that the inclusion of local stakeholders in the project has been very important. It's definitely been a resource for us. It has brought increased ownership through a co-creation process. We have also received feedback and ideas for localizing the data, which has clearly benefited our project. And it has also been a good way to push forward our stakeholders in their adaptation journey. And to conclude, we are currently drafting our key risk assessments and also gathering adaptation measures with our stakeholders. We are currently planning how we should be disseminating our results, especially the visualization of data is very important and it must be thought through to maximize the impact. And also we are in the process of updating the regional climate roadmap, which should be completed before the end of the year. And this was all I wanted to talk to you today. And if you wish to contact me, here's my email. I'll also be happy to answer to your questions. Our GIS specialist Omar is also present here if you have any technical questions.
Okay, so for our second presentation today, thank you. We have with us Claire Lee and James Fitton from the CLIMAAX Tipperary project for Tipperary County Council in Ireland. Claire is the Climate Action Coordinator in the Environment and Climate Action Office of Tipperary County Council. And they delivered the first ever local climate action plan for 2024 to 2029. And James is a climate risk scientist with over 10 years of experience working in the area of climate change risk and adaptation, spatial analysis, and Earth observations. He's an associate director at the Professional Services Network, KPMG Ireland, and they will be presenting their results as far as they have them, as well as some reflections, I think, on the project today. So Claire or James, it's your chance to present now. I think we should.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Christopher. I'll just share the slides, but Claire is going to kick us off.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, James. As Christopher said, I'm from Tipperary County Council. We're very delighted to have received this funding for the CLIMAAX project, and very delighted to work with our partners KPMG Ireland as well, who have great experience on a national level for climate adaptation. I'll move on to the next slide, please, James. So I have 3 slides here, really introductory slides, just to set the scene for Tipperary, and then I'll be handing over to James to go through the project in detail. So just some context about Tipperary. You might have heard that Tipperary now is listed on the Lonely Planet as one of the top 25 places to visit in 2026. So that's a fantastic credit to the county. So it's one of 32 counties in Tipperary in Ireland. So it's a small region. Population is approximately 170,000. It's inland region. It doesn't have the impacts from the Atlantic seaboard that some of our counties have, counties that you might have heard of, such as Sligo and Galway, were hammered by the Atlantic Ocean. However, being inland, it does bring a lot of, I suppose, dispersed challenges to the county. Our economy is very much agriculturally based, and we have strong dependency on agriculture. And our county has mountain ranges, rivers, and lakes, excellent landscape. We have beautiful, I suppose, fertile plains in between our mountainous areas. Our population is very dispersed. We have many villages and towns. Our largest town has approximately 20,000, so it's a small town in the European context. And this brings challenges in that our populations are so dispersed with many small villages across the county with very little resources in some of them. The images there you can see are from those that the historic aspect of the county is also important. So we have a long history in Tipperary in Ireland, a lot of historic buildings and national monuments as well, which are vulnerable to climate change. You can go to the next slide there, James. So just a brief word on the County Council and its role. So Tipperary County Council has approximately 1,300 employees. So in terms of an organisation or a company, it's a large company in the Irish context and has to be managed as such. We also have that political aspect, being a council, a local authority. We've 40 elected representatives who have a role as well in managing and developing the county. Our budget per annum is approximately €250,000. Some of that comes from internal rates and some of that comes from external sources. So in terms of our role then, we have a role in terms of things like delivering housing, social housing, roads maintenance and infrastructure, recreational and amenity services. We provide library services as well. We have a key role in planning. So we provide the planning service across the county. We have a planning system for which enterprises and housing must apply for planning permission through the local authority. That has an influence on climate adaptation as well. We manage water quality. Well, we don't manage the delivery of water anymore. That's a centralised service now. So the National Water Service System is nationally based. We have a role in environmental protection, licensing businesses and waste, water quality surveying and management, and farm inspections as well. We also have a role in economic development. We have an economic development unit that offers grants to businesses, to particularly small and medium enterprises. We offer a fire and emergency service. So the County Council is often first on the scene where there's an extreme weather event. It manages the public response and public safety and ensures that we can cope with extreme weather events. But that's done in partnership with other national bodies, such as the Health Service Executive or the Gardaí, the Garda service for the county, for the country, should I say. So there are services. It's important to note that being a local authority, and it might be slightly different to some of the European regions, a lot of our key functions in the country are now centralised. So we don't have any responsibility for water services, for provision of water systems and sewer systems across the country, and also for agriculture and energy systems and health systems, also educational systems as well. They're nationally based. And I suppose it's that interaction between the local authority services and those other service systems that makes it challenging from an adaptation perspective as well, and in knowing where our role stops and ends. You might just go to the next slide there, James. This is just a slide that I often share to give a sense of what our little local authorities' role in terms of climate adaptation and climate mitigation is. So we're a big organisation, as I said, 1,300 employees. We're fully accountable for our own emissions and adaptation across our services, and we're monitored on that. But in terms of then other services and sectors, such as agriculture and energy, and communities, our role is influencing, coordinating and facilitating and advocating. So we can't, I suppose, manage agriculture. That's managed by the Department of Agriculture nationally and their, I suppose, supporting partners. But we do influence agriculture. Tipperary County Council is very I suppose, influential around the area of the bioeconomy. It supports the development of the bioeconomy. And the bioeconomy is important from a climate mitigation and adaptation perspective. So we have a key role there, and we regulate planning, we provide licensing systems and all those different factors, but we don't have a direct role. And this is our challenge in terms of adaptation. We're on the ground, we're close to communities and our elected representatives, so we do have a strong role in that. So I think that's my update in terms of the local authority. Happy to answer any questions, Christopher, at the very end. I'm happy to hand over to James now if that's appropriate.
Great. Thanks, Claire. And a great introduction to the local authority of Tipperary County Council and the context. And to add to that, I just want to set the scene in where Tipperary is in terms of the climate change risk assessment context and where CLIMAAX fits into that. And you can see on this slide the hierarchy of risk assessments that we have relevant to Ireland and the local authority. So we have obviously the European scale, the EU climate change risk assessment there. Last year in June, the National Climate Change Risk Assessment was published by the EPA, which ourselves in KPMG supported the development of that. And that was Ireland's first national view on the climate risks for the country. And as Christopher outlined at the beginning, at the local authority scale, there's the Local Authority Climate Action Plan, which for Tipperary addresses adaptation and mitigation. And as part of that work was a tier one climate change risk assessment, a qualitative risk assessment performed. And at that local scale, that feeds into Tipperary County Council in terms of county development plans and local economic and community planning as well. So that's the situation to date. And obviously the CLIMAAX project that we're undertaking at the moment, that obviously builds on all of this work that you can see here from that European right down to that local scale. But what this does is advance the knowledge from a qualitative assessment in the Local Authority Climate Action Plan into a semi-quantitative approach in terms of climate risks. And I'll touch on this a little bit further on in the presentation to discuss how this is relevant at the local scale, but also nationally in advancing climate change risk assessments as a whole. Just in terms of the phase one of the CLIMAAX project, for Tipperary County Council. On the left there, obviously, is the CLIMAAX framework. As part of this framework, in terms of the scoping and the risk exploration, obviously using that body of evidence that already exists. Within Tipperary, we actually had a look at 7 of the workflows that were outlined by CLIMAAX, and this is because Tipperary is either already exposed to most of these hazards, or it's starting to emerge. So heavy rainfall and flooding, river flooding in the Tipperary context is a key hazard for the region. Heat waves and droughts, droughts exist and have occurred in the county. Heat waves are an emerging hazard going forward into the future and therefore worthy of focus. Windstorm events, a big issue for the region and the country as a whole. Obviously, the position of Ireland right at the edge of the Atlantic is very much exposed to these large events, and there's been a number over the last few years which have had a significant impact on the country. Fire as well has been something that has been experienced in the county, but not to a large degree, but again, something that is potential to increase in the future due to changes in drought conditions and precipitation, particularly over the summer months. And also snow conditions and heavy snow. Tipperary doesn't necessarily experience snow every year, and Ireland in general doesn't always experience snow. However, when it does occur, it has a large impact upon the local authority in the region due to the scale of the impact. It impacts the whole county and therefore the response. And as Claire outlined earlier, in terms of the responsibilities of the local authority, in terms of the emergency response activities and responsibility, that is a large draw on the resources of the local authority when it does occur. And so in terms of the workflows, we looked at all 7 of those hazards. But one of the key aspects of this project as well is the stakeholder engagement. And within the local authority, Obviously, we have the CLIMAAX team itself. We've also developed an advisory group of people from around the country to advise on the project. We also have within Tipperary County Council itself the climate action team, which Claire outlined earlier as a member, and the wider team there. And also we've had buy-in and support from all the departments within Tipperary County Council and all the other various working groups within the local authority. And then we've also identified a range of stakeholders outside of that local authority boundary as well, and looking at community organisations, regional and sectoral stakeholders in terms of heritage, HSE, etc. Some of the areas that Claire outlined that we don't necessarily cover within the local authority. And so throughout the project, in various different forms of engagement, we've engaged with different areas of those stakeholders, and I'll touch on a little bit more how we're engaging with those stakeholders shortly. I just want to touch on some of the results from phase one. I won't go into each of the 7 workflows because obviously we'd be here all week if I had to go into every single one of those. But you can see from the 7 that we looked at in terms of those risk analysis, what we found was that the highest priority hazards were river flooding, wind, and heavy rainfall, and probably that's to be expected given the information that we had to hand. Those emerging risks that I outlined, heat waves, drought, and fire. So these are things that are not a huge issue at the moment, but are potentially on 2050, 2100 time scale, something that should be looked into. And as I outlined earlier, snow, it doesn't occur that frequently, but potentially there for an impact perspective, something that is quite large and significant for the local authority. So the sort of take-home message from the phase one results was that the workflows worked well as that baseline. They really sort of emphasized I suppose, the key concepts of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability for some of the workflows. They are informative, I think, to give this, in this first instance, this relative sort of indicator of the relative importance of the hazards or the level of the hazard. It really does, I think, in phase two, where we're exploring this in more detail, that local information and local data is something that really does need to be tailored to give, I suppose, decision-ready information. For instance, river flooding, the data that's used in terms of the spatial resolution in that workflow for the European scale is probably at a kilometre scale. It's maybe a bit too large for some of the areas of Tipperary, for instance. And so going through to phase two, we've reduced the focus a little bit more just to allow a bit more detail on some of these workflows. So we're down to 5 of the workflows: river flooding, wind, heavy rainfall, and heat waves, and also snow. And this is probably more for a phase 3 focus than a phase 2. So the frequency isn't that high, but that level of impact and how it's managed is something that is potentially something that can be assessed a bit more in phase 3 and what it means for the local authority in terms of management. In terms of a usability aspect here, I want to just take a bit of a step back of where the CLIMAAX framework sits in relation to other approaches in the country. And I outlined earlier the local authority climate action plan, climate risk assessment, and that's that top row that you can see there. So this is just a mapping of the CLIMAAX stages onto existing approaches for those top 2 rows. So the local authority climate action plans, that qualitative assessment. And you can see we're touching on similar areas of the CLIMAAX framework there. Actually, we touch on pretty much every single area of the framework. And so it aligns already with the approach taken at that qualitative level. That middle band that you can see there is the local authority semi-quantitative risk assessment approach that I myself developed about 5 years ago in collaboration with the Climate Action regional offices. And this is very much focused at how you go from a qualitative assessment looking at probably more of a data-driven aspect and the more GIS type of spatial approach and less of a holistic framework. And again, you can see that from that risk analysis phase, there's a lot of overlap between that existing methodology that we have in Ireland. And I think in combination then, and you can see in CLIMAAX at the bottom there, again, a semi-quantitative climate risk assessment, obviously touching on all aspects of the framework, but it is in alignment with a lot of the work that we're doing already in the Irish context. And that's important because it allows us to potentially take some of those learnings from CLIMAAX as an approach, as a framework, as a whole, and actually take learnings that can be applied at a national level. And we're throughout this project and through other avenues engaging with the climate action regional officers to inform how this piece of work is actually beneficial to the whole country as a whole in terms of understanding this approach. The LA CAPs, the action plans will be updated in the next couple of years. And so obviously any learnings from this are really valuable, and the timing is really good for CLIMAAX really to influence some of that approach going forward into the future for the whole country. And just from the next steps perspective, phase 2, and this is where that stakeholder engagement has been really valuable. We've engaged with a lot of people within the local authority to go from that phase 1, those European scale data sets, down to national scale data sets. So our national standardized climate projections, our flood projections, but also at that local authority scale, really digging into data sets that maybe people in the local authority didn't realize were useful for this type of work. Data sets that sort of sit in the corner, they're used for a specific purpose, but actually we can use them in a number of ways to inform either exposure or crucially that vulnerability aspect as well. And so through this process has been a really good way to actually get buy-in as well, and sort of understanding and raising awareness across the local authority of the type of work that we're doing and the value in some of these data sets that exist. And as we go through, we've been focusing on that hazard exposure and vulnerability concept in terms of the IPCC and the way that the workflows are developed, but also the way to sort of break up and analyze the data as well. So throughout the next few months, phase 2 is concluding, and it's really integrating this local data into these workflows. And I want to just touch on, to end on some of the lessons learned. And again, I just want to take a bit of a step back here in terms of the project as a whole. And this is something Claire and ourselves have been talking pretty much since the beginning of this project, and actually how we can actually start to integrate this and use this within the local authority. And the key thing that's come out of this work and these discussions is how you mainstream this information within the local authority, and you get the integration of this information to existing processes that are ongoing within the local authority related to enterprise risk management frameworks. And what you can see here in front of you is the 12 significant organizational risks that the local authority has identified and assessed. And this is for the whole local authority and not just climate. This is just everything that the local authority sees as a risk. So obviously a cyber risk there, recruitment, procurement, GDPR, etc. And those green ones that I've highlighted there are areas where climate, or probably more precisely extreme weather, is integrated potentially to some extent within those organizational risks. However, climate risk as an individual risk isn't already highlighted, but you can see how on some of these risks that there is obviously an extreme weather and a climate risk related aspect to this. And so what we want to try and do through this project is to mainstream some of these outputs and ensure that we're engaging with the actual governance structures of the local authority to ensure that this isn't just a project that is useful and interesting, but actually starts to influence the way that the local authority potentially operates. And so there's a real opportunity here to provide clarity, to influence those operational risk register that the local authority uses to actually start to embed climate action as not just something that is done on one-off or iteratively, but this is something that is looked at the monthly meetings and really considered within the local authority in the way it does its business. That's it from me. As Claire says, happy to take any questions on any aspects that we've just touched on here.
Excellent. Thanks to both of you. Thank you for this great presentation. We already have 2 questions, so I will jump right into the Q&A. I think the first one is going in the direction of what you presented here at the end. The question is, as an NGO, we also have a similar role, mainly providing analysis, supporting advocacy, and informing policies rather than directly implementing them. Since local authorities often have limited direct power, what strategies do you use to ensure that your risk assessment results actually influence policy and decision-making? I think this could also be very useful for all of us as we move towards phase 3 reporting. Thank you.
Claire, do you want to take that one a little bit more focus on the local authority?
Yes, thanks, James. It's a really good question, actually, and it is something that we're all thinking about. In Ireland, I suppose you'd get the sense that mitigation is understood better than adaptation. It may be climate mitigation, and how you manage it both nationally, regionally, and down to our level is understood by the public and organisations better than adaptation. So we're maybe a year or 2 behind in the adaptation learning. It is something that we're going to have to consider how we build adaptation across our structures and risk management. James touched there on the governance around risk management and how we build it into the day-to-day operations of the local authority. I think phase 3 of the CLIMAAX programme will be a really good opportunity to better think about how we do this. There's other aspects as well that we need to look at. It's our partnerships with other organisations. It's how we do manage our spatial planning, and that needs to be done in a context of better information. The CLIMAAX project will give us that more detailed, granular information about risk management and help our planning of it. James mentioned there as well that we will be reviewing our climate risk assessments and our climate action plans commencing from next 2027 in June. So this is an opportunity now for adaptation, I think, that we will definitely embed better across the country. You might want to mention maybe the National Climate Risk Assessment, James, and how that will filter down to all the different services and sectors as well, the top-down approach.
Absolutely, Claire. And I think it's as I mentioned, in June last year, we published the EPA published the National Climate Change Risk Assessment, and as I said, that's the first sort of national approach to understanding these risks, and that essentially acts as a foundational assessment that, in theory, then in terms of the next phase of the local authority plans, they can look at the NCCRA initially to get that screen, that level of information that there is required, to then go into the further detail on some of the hazards and the risks that they're particularly exposed to. And that's where that spatial element gets more important. The National Climate Change Risk Assessment did do sort of a semi-quantitative spatial assessment on a number of risks, but we couldn't look at all of the risk in that spatial context. And as Claire mentioned there, in terms of spatial planning, and it's come up recently in the Irish context, but it'll be across all of Europe, is this idea of planning and building in areas that are not at risk. And in the Irish context, that was building in floodplains. And over the last month, there's been a number of flood events that have sort of raised the profile of this in terms of planning and decisions which were made 20 years ago that are now an issue now. And people are starting to see that connection between planning, exposure, the economic costs, the personnel, the health costs of all these types of events. And so even though maybe from as Claire outlined at the beginning there, in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the local authority, that spatial planning, that planning piece is a real sort of foundational and primary thing that needs to be addressed to influence a lot of things going forward off that local economic development, communities, health and safety, and all these different aspects as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for these insights. We have more questions in the Q&A box. The next one is, first of all, thank you for sharing the experience and reflection. what participatory approach did you use in the first phase, and how do you plan to engage stakeholders in the second phase? I saw different community groups, but also organizations who usually are not that much represented in climate risk assessment, like heritage organizations. Did you consider these as proxies or intermediary organizations for understanding existing vulnerabilities or identifying vulnerable groups and their needs and capacities, as well as cultural elements at risk?
I can maybe take that one initially, Claire, and jump in if there's anything that I miss. I think from that stakeholder perspective, there's, I suppose, two things here that to mention. I touched on it, that Claire and the rest of the team in Tipperary have done a really good job of engaging with everyone already within the local authority in terms of the different areas of the local authority. So there is a heritage officer, for instance, in the local authority. There is a biodiversity officer. There is a number of themes and areas that are well represented within the local authority from that government perspective. We also, I didn't mention it, but in September last year, the sectoral adaptation plans were published. So that's the national sectors. So that would be transport, health, electricity, water services and water quality, heritage. So there's also a whole other aspect of information there. And we're also well integrated with the personnel within those areas to engage as and when required. I think it's also probably worthwhile mentioning that as we've been going through this project, our approach or focus to some of the stakeholders is slightly changing. As we touched on there in terms of that governance and mainstreaming within the local authority, actually maybe our original, we had probably more public participants in our original sort of idea of this project, but I think we're also starting to see that importance of the engagement within the local authority itself and getting that buy-in, getting that awareness, and actually getting some of these outputs or these concepts used. And there's a lot of other activities that Claire and team are doing within the local authority to raise awareness and to engage with the public and other stakeholders as well in tandem with this project. So we're slightly changing the focus as we go through. Claire, I don't know whether there's anything else that you would like to add.
Yeah, James, you made a really good point there in terms of this project has really helped us start to build understanding of adaptation in our organization. And I suppose the networks that are associated with that. And we have a huge number of networks and groups that support the organization internally and with public facing aspects as well. We will be using for example, our elected council, our 40 members, they will receive presentations and an opportunity to input into this project. We have strategic policy committees that are made up of public and elected representatives. They'll have an opportunity as well. We have our own, I suppose, our climate action team, which is an internal team of senior staff right across the organisation who represent all our different service areas, for example, housing, roads, emergency services. Interacting with them is very important. And they in turn have their own networks, public facing networks. So what we'd probably feel that the best approach to do is to, through them, reach out to public facing networks. Rather than what I found, I suppose, over the years, my background is I'm a town planner as well as a scientist. And public consultation with the general public can be very non-participative. It's difficult for people to understand what this project is about and to come and talk. Really, it must be presented to them in a much more, I suppose, through their own networks that work with them on a day-to-day basis. So we will be, I suppose, getting public opinion through our internal and external networks. I'm also very mindful as well of our limited role as a local authority. We do not manage climate adaptation for the county of Tipperary. The Department of Agriculture manages its agricultural adaptation. The Health Service Executive manages health services. The energy systems manage their own adaptation approach. So we have to think about where the local authority fits into this. Up to now, we've had good engagement with consultation, as James said, and we're definitely happy with it. But it's something we're discussing almost weekly, James, about how to best do this, because it's a very good opportunity to do it. And it is about building that adaptation understanding that we're still at an early stage in. And we'd hope that this CLIMAAX program and Tipperary will act as I suppose, a guidance tool for other local authorities as well, and reviews down the line when we're reviewing the new climate action plans for each local authority. Okay, thank you, Christopher.
Thanks. I'll move right on to the next question. Can you reflect on the multi-risk nature of your project? To which extent is assessing multiple risks simultaneously new for the county? Did any interesting insights emerge?
Yeah, I can touch on that. In terms of the analysis that we did, in terms of the workflows, they were just treated as sort of single hazards occurring sort of individually, as it were. So within this current project, that's sort of the approach that we've taken. Obviously, that multi-hazard and the complex risk aspect of this, of climate risk assessments in general, is an area that I think needs to improve in terms of our approaches. If I can just touch on the National Climate Change Risk Assessment again for Ireland, we did look at the cascading impacts of the risks from a national perspective, and looked at the different sectors that could be impacted or different systems that would be impacted by a single type of event. I think that concurrent events or a river flooding event happening at the same time as a wind event, I think is something that we'll probably explore a little bit in phase 3, but I think it's quite difficult, I think, at this stage to really try and capture the complexities of those types of events, when for some of these hazards we're still struggling with just the basic level of data. So ideally, that's obviously, I think, the direction of travel we need to go in. I think our ability to do that at the moment is fairly limited, certainly in the Irish context. But if others have example from other areas of Europe, I'd be interested to hear more about those types of interaction.
Thanks. Next question would be, I realized there was a lot in place in Ireland already before the start of CLIMAAX. When you consider the data sets you're using in the second phase, are those mainly the local, so the pre-existing data sets? How did the authorities appreciate the EU-based data sets? Did they add new knowledge? And which data sets support you in convincing authorities?
Yeah, interesting question. From the phase 2 data sets, we have in Ireland, say, some climate projections, downscale national climate projections. We have pretty good flood data, river flooding data, and there's a few sort of the exposure data is obviously a little bit better at that local scale, and a little bit further on that vulnerability data, as I say, from the local authority perspective. The European scale data is useful to fill some of the data gaps. So things like the wildfire, the wind data although it's a big hazard in Ireland, we're fairly poor in terms of the actual wind climate projections that we have, although that's potentially changing in the next few years. And also some of the climate projections that translate as the data set, the national climate change projections. They don't include things such as extremes or changes in return periods of events and things. So anything that drives a little bit more of that European data set that is a bit more on change in frequency, change in return periods, has been useful. Snow, for example, was a useful one. That's actually a slight decrease in the frequency. We don't have data sets on snow that cover that change in frequency. So that's been useful to combine the two, use EU data to cover the areas of data gaps that we have. I think it's important that last bit in terms of supporting convincing authorities, as we mentioned already in terms of spatial planning, development plans, there's certain data sets that are used nationally that are fundamental to development plans. So the flood data that we have locally, it's primarily that is the data set that you would use as part of that work. And if you didn't use it, there'd be certainly questions asked about that. And The translate projections, I think, as well, is something as well that is beginning to be that is the go-to data set. But throughout the NCCRA, one of the recommendations was a range of hazard information and data that we need to develop further. And so there is progress being made in that regard. The other data sets that I think are still struggling with, and I think probably everyone in Europe, is that vulnerability aspect. Those other non-climatic data sets that are just as useful to informing climate risk. And I would also include elements of exposure in that as well. I think that's where we can use European scale information and data, but that's where we really do need particular focus, I think, over the next few years, is that vulnerability piece.
Great. One more question from Greece. Will climate risk rules limit farmers' access to insurance? Have you seen any economic impact on building insurance costs? And do these assessments affect insurance contracts? We face a strong debate in our city in Greece.
Yeah, the aspect of insurance and the role of insurance has been something that we've actually been talking a lot throughout this project. It's come up in the media, as I mentioned, in terms of flooding recently in the Irish context, and there is no state intervention in insurance, so there's a lot of places where you can't get flood insurance in the Irish context. That role of insurance to sort of facilitate the economy and to support investment within regions, I think, is something that is really important, and something that Claire and ourselves have been speaking about, and potentially also engaging with the insurers on this. It is certainly something that is growing of importance, and certainly from a KPMG perspective, something that we talk a lot with clients is this role of insurance and how the insurance landscape is changing, not just in the Irish context, but across Europe, across the globe, and the importance of it. And I think it's something for a little bit for phase 3, but again, in terms of the role of the local authority, obviously the local authority doesn't provide insurance for the private sector, for residential properties, etc. But that role of insurance and providing a region that is investable and has a long-term plan to enhance that resilience, I think, is an important focus for not just for Tipperary, but for the country as a whole. Claire, have you got anything else to add?
Yeah, just bringing it back to the local authority and local authorities' roles and responsibilities. We own considerable assets across the county. We've buildings and facilities. We've public amenities. There's old historic buildings we own, blueways and walkways, routes, roads, those kind of things. They have to be insured. We have to insure them. We pay insurance companies annually. And I suppose if climate change increases costs around repairing or managing after events, like it's a risk for our local authority in terms of running it and the operational cost. So very relevant. And I suppose every region across Europe will have different roles and responsibilities and levels of governance, but it's something we do need to be aware of, as James mentioned as well.
Thank you. I think that's all from the questions box. If you allow me one more question I have to James. You showed some diagrams on sort of how different steps that were already in place sort of mapped onto the CLIMAAX framework. And there was one box that you had highlighted in gray that sort of wasn't associated with any of the steps. I think it was impact chain development. I was just wondering what that involves and maybe why you think that this is not something that the framework currently accounts for.
So from the semi-quantitative risk assessment perspective, so the national one, the impact chain development is quite focused on the ISO sort of approach to the impact chain. So looking at the hazard, the exposure, and vulnerability. So from a concept point of view, it is within the CLIMAAX framework. But as a visual, as a graphic, as a sort of communication tool perspective, it's not quite within CLIMAAX as that sort of classic impact chain. From a workflow perspective, it's covering that sort of flow of a hazard or a particular risk. I think from another aspect was that we use those impact chains to look at those factors or indicators which you can then identify the data sets to identify the relevant sort of indicators, though the property or what are you trying to capture for that particular risk. So obviously just the nature of the CLIMAAX and the workflows, a lot of that is sort of done for you. And obviously in phase 2, there's a little bit more of that. But I just felt from a maybe not critical, but too defined. There wasn't this is the impact chain that is this particular risk. Whereas in the semi-quantitative approach we developed, it is quite explicit and it's there as a graphic that can be used also to inform the data analysis, but not and a communication tool. Whereas I think just the way that the CLIMAAX workflows were structured, it was less of an impact chain, but there's still the elements of an impact chain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. That's very interesting. All right. With that, I thank you both again very much for your presentation and being available for the Q&A. And I will hand back to Athanasia for splitting us up into the breakout groups and giving us an introduction to the PICO presentations we'll be having there.
Thank you very much, Christopher. So the next session of our day is the PICO sessions across the regions. And I would like to go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Perfect. Before we move to the description of the sessions, I would like to describe to you what is exactly a PICO presentation for those that are not aware of it. PICO stands for Presenting Interactive Content Presentations, and they provide a quick, high-impact oral overview designed to spark the interest of the participants. The PICO presentations normally take 2 minutes, and they are followed by an interactive discussion around the presented materials, and of course, the author of each PICO can provide additional details. Next slide, please. So, as you can see here, we have 4 different breakout rooms. Topic 1 will be the key risk assessment with the CLIMAAX regions from Greece, Portugal, and Italy. The topic 2, wildfires with CLIMAAX regions from Montenegro. Topic 3, heat waves with CLIMAAX regions from Romania, Spain, and Turkey. And topic 4, floods with CLIMAAX regions from Greece. At this point, I would like to let you know that in case you have any issue to enter the breakout rooms, someone from our side will be here to guide you. And in order to help you even more, I will give you some useful information on how to join the dedicated breakout rooms. As you can see, there is an icon with the title Breakout Rooms, and there are 4 squares on it. So it's easy to spot it at the bottom bar of your screen. You can click on that icon and choose in which room you would like to join. In case you do not see this icon of the breakout rooms, do not panic. Click at the icon More, and a menu will open, and the breakout rooms option will appear there. So, something else that I would like to highlight at this point is that the breakout rooms are not recorded. And this is the main possibility for you to interact with other regions until the end of the project. So we would like to strongly encourage you to express your potential questions and comments. In the breakout rooms will also be there experts from the CLIMAAX consortium in order to feed the discussion with the PICO presenters and help in the exchange of the opinions. So see you there and enjoy. So Welcome back slowly to the plenary session. Let's give 1-2 minutes for the people to return here with us before we follow to the next slides. I hope that you have enjoyed this session and that you opened up and discuss your findings and to be something fruitful for your next steps with CLIMAAX. So I think that we are almost all here. Now that we are closing slowly our second and last day of our virtual forum for the regions of CLIMAAX, we kept the best news for the end. We would like to inform you for the following 2 events. I will start with the one that is taking place the 23rd and 24th. That is the Aspect User Forum, where actually Frederic, our coordinator of CLIMAAX, will showcase the CLIMAAX project in the final event of Aspect project. What is this event? The final Aspect User Forum will take place online the 23rd and 24th of March under the title Advancing Climate Adaptation with Seamless and Tailored Climate Predictions. The event brings together scientists, users, and decision makers to explore how climate prediction across the different timescales can support real-world decision. So the opening keynote on the 23rd of March, around 2:25 minutes Central European time, will be delivered by our Frederic Sperner Wayland, the coordinator of CLIMAAX. Drawing on CLIMAAX experience, the keynote will show how climate information services can strengthen climate adaptation and decision making. And the 2-day forum will showcase the latest advances from the Aspect project and discuss how seamless climate predictions can help build a more climate resilient future. There is also the QR code here if you want to scan and be redirected to find more about the event. And then we have also another interesting event, the 16th of April, the Community of Practice of CLIMAAX with title Agriculture Drought Risk Assessment Learning from Regions. Some information about this event too. The agricultural systems across Europe are increasingly facing prolonged dry periods that threaten crop productivity, soil health, water availability, and the stability of rural economies. Changes in rainfall patterns, higher temperatures, and growing pressure on water resources are making drought a more frequent and complex challenge for farmers and regional authorities alike. So, understanding where and how agriculture is most exposed to drought condition is therefore essential for developing effective adaptation measures and ensuring long-term food system resilience. This CLIMAAX Community of Practice webinar is the 4th in the new Hazard and Workflow Focus series, and the participants will gain insights into how regional teams can assess the agriculture drought hazard likelihood, exposure, and vulnerability, and how the resulting analysis has informed local adaptation planning and risk management strategies. Through the discussions with the toolbox developers, you, the participants, will delve deeper into methodological choices, challenges, and lessons learned, supporting the translation of agriculture drought risk assessment into actionable resilience strategies. Of course, we have the QR here for you if you want to scan and be redirected for even more information of the event. And now I think we can go to our last slide. I would like, before I do the closing, to ask Christopher or Frederic if they want to say something to close our virtual forum.
No, I would say thank you for joining and being there. I've seen very nice progress and actually really good inspiration as well of how not only your region yourself is doing its work, but how it could also be super relevant for the other regions and others in Europe to perform similar analysis. So that was really nice to hear. And from a very practical point of view, and I should have said that because I was involved in making slides, but on the 23rd of March, don't forget that there is also the instructions on the third deliverable for you. So that's also on the afternoon of the 23rd of March.
Thank you very much, Frederick. Christopher, do you have anything to say?
No, nothing other than I quite enjoyed these 2 days. Really, really interesting to see everything that's happening and how sort of the things in the handbook can translate into really sort of actionable and things that you can grasp on a local level. I quite enjoyed that. And yeah, we'll see each other in other sessions like the one on the 23rd again. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Christopher. So, the second and final day of the virtual forum of the regions of CLIMAAX came to an end. I think that today's discussions once again highlighted the diversity of the regional approaches to climate risk assessment and adaptation. And especially the PICO sessions showcased the practical experiences across Europe and neighboring regions. So, on behalf of the organizing partners, I would like to thank you all, speakers and participants, for contributing to this dynamic forum. And we look forward to continuing this exchange and strengthening cooperation among the regions of CLIMAAX community. And stay tuned because we would like to encourage you to follow us also to the final event of CLIMAAX that will come in autumn 2026. More information will come out soon. Have a great rest of your day and see you soon.